Welcome. I'm so glad you joined us for the Equipped Women monthly interview series we're calling Work-Life Confessions. We're going to share insights and lessons learned from the journeys of a diverse range of amazing and successful women. Today, I'm Kelly Mooney, your host and founder of Equipped Women, an inclusive professional community for early career women. And we created Equipped Women for you to help you thrive at work and in life, and to ensure we create a future where there are more women in roles of leadership, influence, and impact. We have a ton of programs and workshops that you can learn about on our site at equippedwomen.com. And today I'm excited to be joined by my co-host, Olivia Henry Harris, who's a founding member of Equipped Women. She's gone through one of our programs. Olivia is 31 years old, works for a nonprofit called the Council of Michigan Foundations, and she was recently promoted to senior coordinator. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here too. And now for our featured guest, I'm delighted to welcome Tina Nieves to share her work-life confessions as a class action attorney, the founder of her own national law firm, a mother of three, and her experience of being routinely underestimated as the only woman of color in the room. Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you. You've had such an amazing life, an amazing journey, and I really just want to share your stories with our community. So we're going to start off with a juicy question at the beginning, and love to hear about a pivotal moment in your life where you saw something bigger and more capable inside of yourself, and you asked yourself, why not me? Or maybe somebody else saw it in you and it changed the course of your life. Do you have such a moment?
Yeah, I probably have a few, but one in particular comes to mind. After law school, my first class action firm. I was with a national firm based in Philadelphia. And it was founded by two partners, very successful firm. We were handling the Exxon Valdez case, all these very large environmental oil spill cases, as well as a lot of securities fraud and consumer fraud cases. And one of the partners was retiring. And I had approached him before he left the firm just to thank him for all I had learned from him, from being able to, litigate these big cases by his side and learn so much from him. And as I was reaching out and having this conversation with him, he turned to me very out of the blue and said, if you ever decide that you want to go off on your own and do this on your own, I'd be happy to invest in you. And
wow,
to do class actions, it's an extremely expensive business because it's all contingent fee and you have to front all the costs. So it can cost millions to take a case to trial without getting paid anything by the client. And so for me, that was a huge vote of confidence from him, not only that he would consider providing some initial financial backing, but also that he just had the confidence in me and thought that I had the abilities to do it on my own without the firm. So I think that was the first time, but for that offer, I can't imagine having been willing to take the leap and take that kind of risk so early on in my career.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So, Tina, why do you think he was so motivated to invest in you and support you in that way? You talked about the confidence that you were showing. Can you give us a little more detail?
Well, ironically, I think that it had a lot to do with the exact reason I was overlooked by so many other men in the industry. First of all, was pretty much all, with the exception of just a couple women, almost entirely dominated by older white gentlemen, older white seasoned litigators. And they were very, very territorial about, their realm and this very small, tight-knit group that was able to finance these large class actions. The partner who was leaving was, to me, he was a maverick. He was really very progressive. And I think he really liked that about me. I think he really liked that I was, in his view, kind of shaking things up in the industry and looked so different than everyone else that was doing that. And I think he felt like, you're pretty much leading our satellite office in Los Angeles. you could do this with some financial backing on your own, because we're pretty much just providing the backing and you're doing all the courtroom work for us in Los Angeles. So, I mean, I think that that's it. I think that obviously he had confidence in my abilities, but he definitely saw more of a path forward than I did. I wasn't even thinking that way at the time.
I love that. An ally found you and you found an ally. That's so
Yes.
wonderful. Well, so it's interesting. In becoming an attorney, I'm curious if you always knew you wanted to become one. I mean, some people feel it in their bones from a really young age, and some people are just really good students, so they just keep going to school until they find out like what they really want to do. So what was it for you that drove you into law?
Well, I think in my early years, probably all the many arguments I had with my father made me realize I was pretty good at arguing. But honestly, I think what it really was for me is when I went to Berkeley for undergraduate and I studied rhetoric, which a lot of people don't know that that's an actual major, but it's the art of persuasion, and it was a fascinating major. And in the course of my studies there, I realized that I really did have talent for advocacy, whether it was oral or written. So law seemed like a natural progression. It wasn't like I set out to be a specific type of lawyer, but I did think if I wanted to continue honing my advocacy skills, that law school would make sense. And I took off a year in between and tried a couple other fields, and kind of process of elimination said, nope, I'm going back to law school. But when I went, I didn't go within mind to be, a transactional lawyer. Would I be a trial lawyer? Would it be a public? Would I be a nonprofit advocate? Would I be an in-house counsel? I really didn't have a feel for that. Finding that niche in the industry and what I really wanted to do with it was really process of elimination by starting out in another field and another type of law that I really did not care for.
So what was your support system like?
Are we talking about, sorry, I think a golf ball just hit my house. It was very loud.
You mean getting through law school?
Law school,
Olivia?
yeah.
So to be honest with you, this sounds a little bit of a sad story, but I really didn't have much of a support system. My father had become gravely ill. My mother was caring for him around the clock, and they lived in a different city. And so I kind of felt like it was sink or swim. I was financing it entirely by myself with student loans. And I just felt like I got to make this work because I don't really have anyone in the wings waiting to help me.
That's daunting, and
I'm
amazing.
sure a lot of women have that experience, or young professionals, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it is. And it's just inspiring, though, to see how you were able to work through it and to get to where you are. And so, one of the things we talked about in promoting this discussion was your experience of being often the only woman in the room, and certainly the only woman of color in the room. And so can you talk a little bit more about like how that felt and paint that picture? And quite honestly, how did you cope?
Well, it felt pretty awful. You're a young fill in the blank in your profession, right? And you're at a table with all of these older men. So the type of work that I did was very collaborative. The court would appoint a leadership committee to every national case, and you would then have to kind of, work with one another to lead and to report back to the court what was going on. So we collaborated among the different firms. For me, it was, and this was when I was working for another national firm before I started my own firm even. I definitely often felt like there was a lot of withheld information. I felt like a lot had already been worked out in private conversations among the men before they came into the room. They had an entire infrastructure of their networking that did not really provide at all for women. So they had their golf tournaments and they had their fly fishing trips at their ranches and that type of thing. And obviously, I was never invited. I can't imagine, but they had organized themselves in so many different ways. They also were in an international trial lawyers association that had no female members at the time. And of course, no one my age would have gotten in that anyway, because you had to have a lot of trials under your belt and I was too young. So they just had so many kind of private back rooms where things were happening that by the time I was at the table, I felt like a lot of things had already been worked out. I also felt like oftentimes I was spoken over or interrupted, or someone would take over the narrative, or someone would take, and this happened a lot, credit for something that I had proposed. So I would propose a strategy and then it would be talked around. And then before you knew it, it was someone else's idea. And then they were going to work on it together and I didn't need to be part of it. I mean, there were a lot of different ways, and I'm sure a lot of it was subconscious. I really don't think it was all deliberate, but it was just a very dismissive type of practice. It was very easy for them to say, oh yeah, we know what we're doing here. You don't need to worry your pretty little head kind of thing. A lot of that, attitude.
Yeah, definitely been there and sometimes still there with being the only Black woman in room. So
Yeah.
get it for sure. How did you cope and how did you turn being underestimated into your superpower?
Well, and it was multifaceted. Let me tell you, let me say that. I realized that no matter what I did, they were always going to move the goalpost because they were so protective and territorial over keeping control over these big pieces of litigation. So one thing I did was I stopped being an apologist. I used to always say, and I think it's very common for females especially and young people, I'm sorry, can I just interject or can I get a point? And, that type of thing. I really stopped doing that completely. I stopped sharing my foreshadowing litigation strategies with them because I knew that ultimately they'd end up taking credit for it. So if it was something that I could take directly to the judge in a motion, I would do that without consulting them, which always really caught them off guard. I mean, they looked at like the audacity of this young lawyer to do that, but it wasn't working the other way, So I tried the other way first. So I had to kind of break some unspoken rules I think that they had. So I stopped really consulting them on all of my litigation strategies. I started speaking up a little bit more. And then, I think those were the basic things that I did. And then I really made a very conscious decision after kind of hitting my head against that wall for so long, thinking, well, if I'm nice, or if I try to chat them up, or if I ask them to go to lunch, none of that was really working. So I ultimately just said, you know what, I'm just going to kind of have to do this on my own. And I'm going to let my results speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I would say that in the beginning, one of my big strategies that was really a mistake I see in hindsight is I tried to fit in with them. So I was trying to be like them, talk, get in whatever male-centered conversations that they were having, I was trying to be part of it. And I realized it was not working. It was not going to work. And so I just ditched that entirely and said, you know what, I'm not going to try to be self-promoting like they are. I'm not going to try to be constantly tooting my own horn. I'm just going to let the results speak for themselves. And if I don't think I'm going to have a good audience with them and they're not going to back me on this, I'm just going to take it to the judge. And so I started getting some good rulings. And then I don't want to say that overnight it changed. It just became evident to them that they couldn't ignore me. They had to start bringing me under the umbrella.
I love that. And I love that actually that there was a judge who could be a neutral party, because we don't always have that as much as we would like in the workplace. So your competency shined through and he or she could see that, which is amazing. And I know you've told stories too about having to pretend that you like sports or understand sports just to sort of hang in with all their lingo.
That's right.
Yeah, well, you're a good sport in that regard. Pun intended.
That was one of the, actually, there was an example. Do you want me to share?
Sure.
There's a particular example that was just so egregious. I still think about it sometimes and I can't believe it. But I was working for an insurance defense firm. It's before I'd gone and kind of skipped over to the plaintiff side and gone into class actions. And it was a large multi-party case, and I was representing one of the defendants, which was a Fortune 500 company. And I was in this deposition. I just reported this deposition, and the lead questioner, the party who had noticed the deposition, I walked in, he said, we don't have enough exhibits. Okay, now that is his responsibility. But he said, we don't have enough exhibits for all the parties that are here. And he turned to me, the only female other than the court reporter in the room, and said, would you mind going and making copies? And I was thinking, I'm not a secretary, but I didn't want to make a scene. I was totally caught off guard, and I just was kind of speechless. So I said, oh, sure. And I went and did it, and I was not comfortable with it. Anyway, so I went and did it, and I was insulted. And when I came back into the room, they had started the deposition, which was very significant because that means there was a portion of the time that things could have been asked and my client wasn't adequately represented. There was no representation in the room. And I was very flustered by that. I just couldn't believe how disrespectful that had been. And went through to the first break in the deposition. And the court reporter, who was also female, said to me, I've never seen that happen before. You've got to do something. So I continued on with the deposition during the day, went home or went back to my office in downtown Los Angeles, just so upset with myself and upset with him, and mentioned to one of the senior partners what had happened. And, I said, obviously, if I knew they were going to start the deposition, I would never have left the room. So, and he said, you go right back in there and you put it on the record. So the next morning they're starting the deposition. And I said, excuse me, I have a statement before we begin. Once, the court reporter sworn everyone in. And I put right on the record exactly what had happened, what this counsel had done, how my client had been prejudiced. And I asked the court to take judicial notice. So he was kind of dumbstruck and that he was getting called out like that. But I definitely felt like, okay, that's not going to happen again, at least in this litigation. So.
Hell yeah. I love that. And that you weren't self-promoting, you were self-advocating. And that, I think, is a powerful, powerful way of standing up for yourself. I'm so glad that you did that. When looking at, just this discrimination that happens in the workplace, some of it, conscious, some of it unconscious. When I reflect back on my career, there were 2 times I learned that I was making 50% less than my male equivalent for the same job. And at the time, I just kind of accepted it as the way things were. And as I've gotten older and reflected on it, I'm furious when I think back about it. And it's part of what's fueling me to want to build equipped women so that we don't have this anymore in the workplace. And so I'm curious, did you ever have an inequity like that? I mean, you just shared an example of being out of the flow of information and being purposely taken advantage of. Did you have any other discriminatory experiences, whether being underpaid or underpromoted or overlooked? Did you have any other examples?
It wasn't a payment thing. And, as you know, a lot of times, even to this day, people aren't sharing their information, what they're getting paid. So I may have gotten paid less than a male counterpart, but if I did, I didn't know. It wasn't really something we discussed. For me, it was much more being shut out of the room. And I mean that kind of metaphorically, because the type of business I was in order to do well in litigation, you wanted to have some control over it, which meant that you wanted the court to appoint you to a leadership position. And there were all kinds of things going on where they would try to keep me out of that. And sometimes I'd have to apply to the court myself. And towards, later in my years, I think it was the first time ever, but I led a slate of women and put forth a slate of women, an entirely female leadership, because over the 30 plus years I've been practicing at that point, there are more women come into the field. But early on, I mean, it was just constantly trying to kind of jump over the crowd and get myself in wherever I could, and I just had to overcome those obstacles. But it was really, I think, they're trying to control the information and keep information away from me, so I couldn't be there when the critical decisions were being made on who and how it was going to get litigated. So I had.
Well, you really had to show persistence and determination.
I was very persistent. There's nothing to motivate me like telling me I can't do something. So when they said you can't, I was like, yeah, I can.
Well, that's a good segue to your personal life, if you don't mind me digging in a little bit. You're married to another successful attorney, so that's got to be an interesting household. And you have 3 thriving kids. And so I think a lot of women who are trying to have a relationship or have a family, or really just balance a lot of things in their life, or integrate, as we like to say at Equipped, a lot of things in their life. The big question is, how did you do all that? You were traveling all over the country. You had high stakes cases where you were lobbying on behalf of consumers who were being defrauded. You had so much responsibility on your shoulders. How did you do it?
Well, when I was working for another firm, I needed more flexibility than I had initially, which had a lot to do with why I decided to go off on my own. So I could truly, handle my own schedule and be home when I needed to be home, or be there for my children when I felt like I needed to. But I had to, first of all, picking your mate. If you are not single, if you have a mate, I think picking your mate is key. My husband happened to be, his mother was a professional woman. He had great respect for professional women and great respect for we met in law school, but very great respect for my work. And so he was extremely supportive. So when we did have in our family, first we practiced for several years without children, but when we did have our family, he was so hands-on with the kids that we were very much equals. And when he needed to be at court somewhere, I was there. And when I needed to be, he was there. And we used to joke that we both needed a wife because it just seemed like we needed somebody at home, like doing some of the things that just weren't going to get done. So when we needed help, we did hire help. But we were there for the big things. And going out on my own and starting my own practice definitely gave me a lot of flexibility, because now my office was very close to my home. When I needed to run to the school, pick someone up, drop someone off, I could do those kind of things. And before, I had been working downtown Los Angeles, which was quite a distance from my home. So that made a big difference for me as well. But I would say ultimately having a supportive partner who was able to kind of attend to things that I couldn't when I was on the road and traveling, that was a big part of it.
Yeah. As a newlywed, hearing about your partnership and making it work with careers is very inspiring. So
Yes.
having a partnership there and compromising both ways. Thank you for
Our
sharing.
friends would always say, you have the most egalitarian relationship we've ever seen. I mean, we did view each other as kind of interchangeable. I got you when you need it, and you got me when I need it.
I love that. And I think it's really important, a really important message to share. I felt so passionately about it. I wrote a blog post on that topic earlier this year on our website. You guys can find it. It's called Marry Well. And it's that whole same idea, Tina, is like who you pick to be in your life is so important, that they support you and they celebrate your success and they're not jealous of it, and that you have this great relationship. So I love that you found that, Tina, in your husband, Omel. I know he's an amazing man who has supported your journey. So thank you for
that. Yeah, and I thank you for that. But he really has. And one thing that I would add is that I've seen so many relationships that I don't want to say the woman's successful, the man's not, or it can be either direction, but I've seen so many relationships of our peers where someone's career really takes off, or they start getting really celebrated or a lot of media attention, and the other partner becomes really threatened by it. And I felt very fortunate that as I was getting more notoriety, I was no more successful. He was great at what he did, but what I did was making the news because they were, kind of newsworthy events, and he was, more, party on party contract kind of thing. So he always celebrated that. He was never threatened at all, which was very helpful.
That's awesome. That's when you've got the right mate. And, it's hard to ask this question in the climate of what's happening today with human rights and women's rights, and the notion of women having it all. Sometimes we hear women can't have it all, but do you subscribe to that belief, or what is your philosophy about having it all?
Well, I definitely do not subscribe. I believe that women can have it all. I really do. I just think a lot of it comes down to how you define having it all. And I think it depends a lot on where you set your boundaries. My idea of having it all when I was young is a lot different than it is now. And I wish I'd had that view now than back then. It would have saved me a lot of heartache. But back then I really felt like I was absolutely going to be 100% there with the family, with the children, with all of my household, responsibilities. And on the other hand, I was going to be 100% there for work. And I was really running myself ragged trying to do that. And it took a while to start making some adjustments to realize, I'm going to have to not be there for every single thing, or not be there right when they get out of school, or, they can probably wait until 7 until they see me. Some of those things I had to start giving up control over some of those things. But I just spent so much time feeling so much guilt over not being fully there all the time. And now, and over the years, I shouldn't say now, like you can't just fast forward, but over the years, I started to realize that, especially as my children grew older and we could have these conversations, that while I thought that I was failing in my responsibilities of motherhood because I wasn't there all the time, what I was actually doing was modeling for them what a strong, independent, professional woman looked like. And they've grown up, and one of them is actually married and has married someone like that. So I'm super excited about that. But I think that I didn't really give enough credence or value to the fact that I was being a good role model for them. I was just focusing on, I wasn't there to make, your dinner. And they never grew up with the resentment about that, because they were always well cared for, whether, it was a nanny or it was my husband or whatever. But speaking to them as they're now, 30, I have twins that are 30 and a 28-year-old, and speaking to them now, when they talk about it, I'm like, what was I doing spending all that time feeling so guilty? I mean, I really beat myself up for no reason. So I think that you can have it all. I just think you need to figure out what the right balance is for you. And in my case, I realized I couldn't do it for another firm. I needed to do it on my own, because I needed a little more flexibility. I felt like I could have. In this post-COVID world, I think that's totally different now. But at the time, there was a lot of premium put on the attorney that, that spent 16 hours at the office, and I knew that wasn't going to work for the kind of life that I wanted to have. And so that had a lot to do with me going off on my own.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I appreciate you saying, it depends how you define all. And maybe this is just a phrase we should toss aside as society, because everybody's life desires and dreams are different, and it's not so formulaic or a recipe. And so at Equipped, we really say, if you can really drive your career in life with intention, and that's, I think, really what you ultimately arrived at, it sounds like, from what you just described, being more intentional.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I think those intentions at the beginning of a relationship and at the beginning of having a family, I think those are really helpful. Also, when my children were coming along, we treated the family like a team. We always said, Mom does this kind of work, Dad does that kind of work. Your job on the team is to go do well in school, and then we're all going to share the household duties.
Yeah.
Having 3 boys, they really responded to that. They're like, okay, we got it.
I love that. One of my former colleagues, Melissa Dorco, their family, they call it Team Dorco. There's 3 kids. And so it's always like, hey, we're a team. And so it's funny to hear you use that word too. I want to shift a little bit and talk about a little bit more about any maybe life-changing mentors. Did you have a mentor? Did you have a coach? Did you get any training through your career, or have you talked about the person who was your pivotal moment person, but did you have anything else that was more like systemic throughout your career that really gave you the support you needed?
No, which is why I think this is a brilliant idea on your part, Kelly. I think there's a real need for this. Later in the later years of my career, I've seen a little more of this, popping up within the legal industry, where women are starting to organize. But when I was coming along, I had two male mentors. Both were extraordinarily successful trial lawyers who took an interest in me. One was an attorney way back when we had the savings and loan debacle. One of them chose me to be on his trial team against the Charles Keating case out in Arizona. And, he had a lot of confidence in me, and he always kind of gave me these positions that gave me some recognition in the field, because people wouldn't have seen me other than that. I mean, he was giving me exposure, and he was pulling me from another firm, an entirely different firm, but I was the only person who was getting appointments on his cases. And so that was very helpful to me, and he was always very supportive as well. So I had a couple, and then there was the one I mentioned earlier in our interview. So I did have a couple of different people who took interest in me and opened some doors for me. But in terms of anything that was systemic or ongoing, no. And I didn't have any coaches, and I didn't really have any female, definitely didn't have any female guidance. I joined the insurance defense firm that I joined because there was a female lawyer, and as soon as I joined, she went to the federal bench. So I was thinking that was going to be my mentor, but she left almost immediately when I joined.
So, what do you wish you would have had access to that you didn't? Especially hearing you had a couple of mentors here and there, and now like this kind of program with equipped women. What would you have loved to have coming up in your career?
Well, I think just generally, and this was pervasive throughout business, right? This has been pervasive throughout business for a long time, and definitely throughout the legal industry as well. The men have this well orchestrated networking infrastructure that's been there for years, for as long as law firms have existed. And I was always trying to fit into that, and I was getting appointments to speak, and so I was. It's not like I was excluded from that, but I do think that I felt very much like a relic because there weren't that many back then, doing it. But what I started doing later on was organizing on my own, like I mentioned. Sorry, there's a fly in here, but organizing women as I found women that were, doing really high quality work from firms on the East Coast and the South, and I started organizing small groups of them. And like I said, we ended up putting together a slate of leadership that I think the men, it really blew their minds. Like, what? It was the Yaz litigation. It was a female, it was a birth control case. And we're like, okay, every other case, even the ones that only are affecting the women, like the diet pill litigation, are being run by men. Maybe it's time for a judge to appoint women. So I think that instead of trying to find ways to assimilate in the men's groups, I wish that earlier on in my career, I could have done it. And I wish that I had earlier on started just creating it myself, just creating the networking opportunities for women myself, instead of trying to say, hey, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to try to find a couple women. I just should have done a completely different thing. And you just have to have the imagination, and it could have been done earlier than it was.
I love that. And then we're trying to make that become a little more frictionless for women. So it's just available, and it's easier, and it's helping young women early in their career. Sometimes our networks don't really take shape till much, much later in our career. So that's awesome. Okay, so final question, and then we're going to go to some Q&A. I've been doing some teaching at the college level, and one of the questions I get asked most often is, what would your advice be for your 25-year-old self? So I would like to pose that exact question to you. What would your advice be to your 25-year-old self, or even let's say 31-year-old self, because we've got Olivia here joining us.
Okay. Well, I have a lot of points that I would make. Number one, I'm just going to say first impressions are everything. If you establish yourself in the beginning of any field as being a go-to person, or a person that's dependable and reliable, and people know if they go to you, the job's going to get done, they never forget that first impression. And the converse is also true. If you flub on the first one, or you flake on a commitment, they're not going to come back to you and give you a second chance. So I think that showing up and really making sure your first impressions are good, I think that's very important. I think number two is recognizing your value. It's very easy, especially for young females, in my opinion, to be deferential and think, oh, well, you're older, you're more seasoned, you know more, do you mind if I, just pipe in something? And I think that really showing up with confidence and recognizing, especially when you're the only woman in the room, recognizing that your perspective might just contribute something that no one else in the room has the ability to project. So, choosing your spots, but definitely speaking up with confidence. I think that's also very important. And then having people skills, being trustworthy, those connections that you make with people can give rise to all kinds of opportunities, which leads me to my next point, which is always take advantage of the opportunities, even when they seem a little bit big or unmanageable. My default was yes. When there was an opportunity that came to me, I'd figure it out later. I'd rather say yes, get the position, and figure it out later. And for me, in my field, what that led to was me being asked to speak in multiple trial lawyer organizations around the country. And the more I got asked to join panels, the more I became a thought leader and a scholar on specific issues. And then that led to recognition that got me appointed to leadership positions and cases. So if I had not, I really credit that with just taking the opportunities in the beginning when I thought, I don't want to do that. That sounds really intimidating when we come to speak to 350 trial lawyers in Las Vegas. I don't think so, but I did it. And
Yes.
I did it. And I really felt like it led to a lot of things that flowed from that.
High five. Those are all really awesome tips. Olivia, what do we have in the Q&A or the chat?
Yeah, so first question, just wondering, do you think having a woman mentor would have been or made a big difference compared to the couple of male mentors that you mentioned earlier?
I do. There are certain things you're never going to discuss with a male mentor. At least for me, I do feel like things have come along over the last few decades, but just family was a really big issue for me. Balancing family, figuring out how am I going to do a trial in Arizona when I've got 3 little kids at home. Like, there were a lot of issues that related to very personal things that I knew I would be looked at as less than if I discussed with any of the men that I worked with. So those kind of things I just had to work out on my own. It would have created a lot more, I think, acceptance even among the men if there were more women that were, open about those issues and open about the fact that they needed to share those responsibilities equally with whoever the partner was. But I definitely think that it would have given me more comfort, more confidence, and I probably could have picked up a lot of tips along the way. I always, when they say, when there's a crisis, look for the helpers in a crowd. I always felt like there were a couple female judges on the bench, and who we drew as a judge was always random. But when I was in front of a female judge, I really felt like I had an ally. She could read the room and she saw what I was up against, and she was always very attentive to what I had to say, or she'd ask follow-up questions or really give me the floor. So, I had them along the way, but they were very, spotty. So I think it would make a very big difference. Yes.
Yeah. Another one that came in is, can you share what a difference you've seen working with like the group of women that you mentioned earlier? Um, did you see a difference in yourself and how you were interacting with women, the advocacy of that, or even in them, in their careers and their lives?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but you're asking if I saw a difference in how we worked among ourselves with women versus men.
Or growth in yourself or in those women personally.
Oh, definitely. I think that working with women, you're working with your peers. And I think, like I said, every decade, I feel like we march a tiny bit closer to this. But I think that working with women, for me, it was all of the other stuff was stripped away. I was no longer having to fight my way into the room, fight my way into the conversation, fight my way in front of, in front of the court for leadership positions. All of that was wiped away. Things became very much more collaborative when it was all women, in my opinion. So there was definitely a different dynamic. Not to say that I want to do everything with all women, because of course all men aren't the same, and some men are better at working with women than others.
We probably have time for one more. Olivia?
Yeah. Next one, how do you prioritize your values at work?
How do I prioritize my values at work? Well, for me, family always comes first. But I had that all squared away and I had a system, and that really didn't interfere with my work very much. But I was really all about working efficiently and smartly and not just taking time. So I was really about figuring out how to cut down to the essence of an issue and how to resolve that as quickly and efficiently as possible versus doing busy work or creating a lot of discovery to keep the other party on their heels and just delay tactics. I was always every day when I went into work, and I don't think everyone does this, but I would recommend it for women, for young professionals. I always had a goal every single day. Every single day I go in and say, I'm going to tackle these things before lunch and these things after lunch. And that I felt it was like making those little goals got me to my goals so much faster rather than getting distracted by phone calls or meetings or whatever it was. I knew what needed to get done that week, what needed to get done that day, and what time I wanted to get it done by. So I just really put things into little chunks, and it helped me be far more efficient. And that way I felt like I could kind of truncate my day and spend more time with the family.
I relate to that, and having kids, it really forces you to be super efficient and time, tuned in to how you use your time, that I know I wasn't as much that way before that. And even all the people we employed over so many years at our agency, the moms had an extra special ability to focus because your time was so constrained. And so it applies to everybody, but I appreciate you sharing that. So we're going to shift into just a final lightning round, a few quick questions. If you had to sum up your journey, is your success more about luck, hard work, or timing?
I think it was hard work and perseverance. I was knocked out of the ring a lot of times, and I kept coming back until they got tired of pushing me out.
You did, girl.
I think it was, I don't want to say that I was working harder than anyone else, but I just think it was really, very persistent.
Yeah, nobody gave you anything. Okay, simple softball. Favorite color and why?
Green. I think it's elegant. It's the color of life. It's the color of nature. It's the color of balance. I just love green.
And Kelly green.
The color of my mother's eyes.
And Kelly green, is that why? No. Okay, I know you've been a world traveler, but a place that you want to go, you haven't been, but it's still on your bucket list.
We've done quite a bit of travel, but I'm still wanting to get to New Zealand, and I just really have to get myself motivated for that long flight. And I'd really like to get to Thailand. So those are two bucket list spots I haven't gotten to yet.
Oh, well, I might just have to be there with you. Those are on my list too. Awesome. Well, okay. And your final words, a book that you've read that stuck with you that you think would positively impact our equipped community.
Well, this isn't a self-help book. This is a book of inspiration. And there's a book called The Right Words at the Right Time by Marlo Thomas. And she was married to Phil Donahue. This might be before everyone's time. But she reached out to her many celebrity friends and asked everyone to write short essays about something someone said to them that changed the trajectory of their life. And there were so many amazing stories in there, from Muhammad Ali to, all kinds of people. But the one that struck me the most, and I think is very pertinent for this audience, was Danny Thomas was a very famous Hollywood actor. And that's Marlo's father. And Marlo was a young actress, and she had gotten her first Broadway lead. And she was terrified. And she was in the dressing room right before the curtain call for her opening night. And she just thought, it's a lose-lose. If I'm good, it's because of nepotism, and that's the only reason I got the role. And if I'm bad, I'm never going to be as good an actor as my father. So she was really struggling with being in the shadow of her father. And a messenger came to the door and gave her a big white box that had a big red bow on it. And she opened it up, and inside was the bridle of a racing horse. And it said, "Run your own race, baby. Love, Dad." And I just thought I think that message is so wonderful. And I think for all of us, we need to lean into who we are and being the women in the room. And I think that we all need to just get out there and run our own race.
That's lovely, Tina, and a perfect place to end this conversation. But thank you so much, Tina Nieves, for being here and sharing your story. And thank you to my co-host today, Olivia Henry Harris. I'm so delighted you could have joined me and be part of our learning journey together. So thanks to both of you. And thanks to all of you for tuning in to Work-Life Confessions. I'm really grateful. Our next interview is with Shannon Glass on August 17th, where we'll discuss her journey from receptionist to Nike executive. And then on August 2nd, we're featuring our first equipped workshop, which I'm super excited about, powering up your LinkedIn profile. We're going to have a lot of really great tips from Heather Spiegel, who's a guru on all things LinkedIn, an executive recruiter and a coach, and she knows how to maximize LinkedIn. And, you know, we all want to shine on LinkedIn. So I think it's a session you won't want to miss. You can find all of that on our website at equippedwomen.com. And in closing, I would just say, as a startup, we would love your ideas. We need your support in order to fulfill our mission to get more women over the broken rung and into roles of leadership, influence, and impact. And so if you have ideas, feel free to drop me an email at kelly@equippedwomen.com, and you'll definitely get a response from me. And I hope you'll help us continue to build our community and bring a friend to one of our next events. Until then, see you next time.